Hello, this is Brett Lonsdale. Welcome to the session this afternoon here in the UK on the Making SharePoint Permissions Easy using DeliverPoint. First of all, I just want to thank you all for attending, and just bear with me whilst we go through a couple of slides introducing myself and the company, and then we're going to jump straight into DeliverPoint and see how it can be used to help make permissions a lot easier for not just SharePoint farm admins, but also for site owners and site collection administrators, and anybody that basically has full control to a site or to content and needs to manage the permissions on it. So to start off with, just a quick introduction to the company if you're not familiar with Lightning Tools. Lightning Tools is around 10 years old now. We'll be celebrating 10 years of building SharePoint tools and web parts at the end of this year. We started off in the business data catalog and building a tool called BDC Metaman back in the day of SharePoint 2007, and besides that, we've grown into building permissions management tools. Obviously, that's what we're going to be looking at today, as well as content aggregation and other bits and pieces like data visualization tools, charting, data view, and also social tools as well, such as our discussion forum product, the Social Squared. So a number of different products that work across all versions of SharePoint, and also that includes SharePoint Online as well with Office 365. There's quite a few things I do in the community. There's things around the we have a pod show called the SharePoint Pod Show, and also we organise an event here in the UK called UK Community Day. It's a hands-on event where anybody can attend. They bring a device and we go through a number of different things using SharePoint out of the box, such as development, administration, and what have you. And last of all, just mention our Twitter account. If you do use Twitter, feel free to post any questions throughout the webinar. Today, you'll have plenty of opportunity to ask questions at the end of the webinar, so feel free to raise your hand at the end and I can unmute you and you can ask your question, or you can also email me or like I say, tweet your question and I'll be happy to answer it there too. Okay, so that's pretty much it. I want to keep the introductions fairly short and sweet, as we've got a lot of content to get through. So let's talk about what we're going to be going through today. I was going to start off with just some regular sort of permission pain points that our customers face when using SharePoint out of the box for managing permissions. So we'll take a look at some of those and what they are, as well as looking at some good practices, things that we should be doing to maintain a consistent and neat and tidy permission structure within our SharePoint environments. And once we've done that, which should just be a couple of slides, we're going to jump into the demonstration. It'll be a live demo of the bullets that you can see there. We'll have a look at the permission reporting, and this is permission reporting not just again for the farm administrators, but it might be that you've got full control to a folder or a document or anything for that matter in SharePoint, and you need to discover the permissions on it and know who can actually see that content. So this is a product that's not just used by those in IT. You could be a salesperson for all that it matters. It just so happens that you own some content. You've put a document into a document library. It's your document. You have full control to it. You want to know that the right people can see that document, and that's exactly what the product is all about. So we can get a realistic view as to who can see that content. So we'll be having a look at the permissions reporting, and another thing that is very useful is to also be able to manage the permission inheritance across all of these objects. So you can stare at a document library and see thousands of documents and folders and not know which ones inherit permissions and which ones have broken permission inheritance. And that gets worse with the with SharePoint 2003 onwards, when you've got the ability to share documents and share folders. So it's very encouraging for a user to just click that share button. That will break permission inheritance and add somebody to the ACL of that item. So we'll have a look at how we can manage permission inheritance and also report on it. We'll also take a look at granting permissions, so we can do that in bulk. Some of the nice features that we get to do is be able to also grant permissions temporarily to some users. So if you've got a contractor or somebody that's going to be with you for just a short period of time, or even need more privileges for a short period of time. Maybe you've got somebody that is typically a contributor, but maybe they're going to be doing some work on a site and they need design permissions. So we could go ahead and grant them design permissions for a month, and it would automatically be revoked after that. So there's lots of nice features around granting permissions as well. We'll look at some other bulk permissions management. So what happens if somebody leaves the organization? How can we deal with the permissions that user had? Well, one of the things we can use with DeliverPoint is the ability to have a look at what permissions they had anywhere. And we can start this right at the largest scope of being the SharePoint farm all the way down to an item, and have a look at what permissions they have to all of those objects. At that point, we can make a decision. We might decide, well, let's just go ahead and delete those permissions. We can just go ahead and delete all of them. Or we could take the assumption that at least for some site collections or some sites that user is going to be replaced. So we can transfer the permissions that they did have to another user, and that can be done in one action, if you like, rather than trying to figure out all of the different places manually that user had permissions, and then manually going and removing them and granting them to somebody else. We'll also take a look at the auditing. So it's all very well and good seeing, well, who's got permissions now, but that often raises a question as to, well, why has that person got permissions, or why does that person have full control, and so on. And that's one of the things that the auditing can tell us. So quite often, permissions are granted inadvertently. So let's just take somebody, for example, that is made the group owner or has the ability of modifying the group membership within a given site. They can go and add some team members to that site, not knowing that that group is actually used elsewhere as well in other sibling sites or sub-sites inside the same site collection. So you could innocently, by adding somebody to a group that is going to affect the current site, also be giving that user access to other sites as well and other content that maybe they should not see. So through the permissions auditing, that would tell us that information. We can see who granted permissions, what permissions were granted, how were they granted, and at what location were they granted as well. So it could be that it's the auditing report is showing that somebody received permissions, maybe contribute permissions to site B, but the actual permissions were granted at site A. So for that reason, we could excuse them and just simply go ahead and remove that permission and tidy it up. We've also got the ability to configure permission alerts as well. So the permission alerts allow us to decentralize permissions management. We can, as farm administrators, we can say, well, let's decentralize permissions management. Let's give the business users who have a better understanding as to who should have access to content inside their team sites. Let's allow them to manage permissions, but I just want to keep a little bit of an eye on what's going on. So what you can do is you can trigger alerts that maybe say, well, if anybody gives Edward Snowden full control to anything in this site collection, then tell me about it immediately. So you'll get an email and it will notify you of that change. We could also say, well, tell me if any permission inheritance breaks anywhere within this site. I need to know about that. I'd prefer everything in this site to be inheriting permissions. But yeah, should somebody break the permission inheritance, it would notify you. So these are some of the things that we're going to be taking a look at using a live demo. So starting off, what are the sort of regular pain points that people are experiencing with SharePoint permissions? Well, right at the very top there, we've got the reporting. And of course, SharePoint does offer permission reporting. A couple of things it doesn't do is include users from the Active Directory groups. So there's a couple of ways where you could assign permissions to groups. Some people just simply add users from the Active Directory or from forms-based authentication for that matter into SharePoint groups, and that's how they organize the permissions that the users will have. Other organizations might use Active Directory groups that they've already got, security groups that they've already got for different departments or different projects inside their organization, and they can add them either to an existing SharePoint group, or they could grant permissions to that Active Directory group directly, and that will give those users permissions as well. So you could have a mixture of SharePoint groups and Active Directory groups, which is quite often the case, or you could just use SharePoint groups or AD groups. Now we're just going to flick into SharePoint for a moment to have a look at one of the issues that gives. So when we go to the site settings within a SharePoint team site, and we go to the site permissions page, you'll notice here that this particular permissions report is just showing me the 3 SharePoint groups, the typical ones that you would see for the readers, members, and owners. And if we navigate into the members group, which we can see has edit permissions, when we navigate into that group, we can see that we've got a couple of individual users. We've got Brett and Michael, but we also have a couple of domain groups as well. We have developers and we have sales. And if we click onto one of those groups, it doesn't actually give us who is a member of those groups. So what do we do instead? We're using SharePoint out of the box. You could use the check permissions option, but it's very tricky to kind of guess who might be in those groups. So we can start going through lots of different users here. Let's look at one and hit check now, and sure enough, well, that user's in the readers group. So we can see that user has read permissions. But if we go into the readers group, we can't see that user. So is that user a member of the students group, or is that user a member of the teachers group? We don't know. So these are some of the issues that we face when we're trying to establish who's got permissions to that particular team site. You can only report on one object at a time as well. So let's just consider a document library. So if we go inside a document library, inside this document library, okay, there's just a handful of documents and a couple of folders, but there's 4 clicks in order to get down to the permission report. We need to do those 4 clicks to be able to see who's actually got permissions, and also whether that folder or that document is inheriting permissions or not, or does it have unique permissions. It doesn't tell us just by simply running a report on this document library who's got or which of the objects have broken permission inheritance. So that's really another issue. Everything is done an object at a time. Limited access is another thing quite often misunderstood. So limited access is a permission level that is granted to users automatically. If you make a user or assign a user permissions to a child object, such as a list, a library, or a document, or a folder, a list item, whatever, they will be given limited access to the container, to the team site, and that would allow that user to be able to navigate to the content that they do have permissions to. Sometimes it's incorrectly reported, and this is usually down to the fact that the Active Directory groups aren't enumerated. So when we maybe have a look at the user Bob, we can see that Bob has limited access to a site. He may actually have a lot more than that, but SharePoint is reporting limited access because it didn't know that Bob was inside an Active Directory group that happens to maybe have full control. And already mentioned is the check permissions only works for a single account as well. So you literally have to do one user at a time when trying to use the check permissions option. A couple of other things, there's no bulk management. So what if somebody does leave the organization? Well, remember there's 4 clicks per object, and that's just to be able to determine if that object has inherited permissions or not. We then have to figure out what permissions that user has to that object and then remove that user. Quite often this isn't done. This snowballs because instead of doing that overwhelming task, we simply just disable the user inside the Active Directory and then they can't authenticate. That's fantastic. They can't authenticate, so there's no security risk. However, it does leave somewhat a mess behind inside SharePoint. We've got all of these different places where that user has been granted permissions, and they're still showing up inside the SharePoint groups. They're still showing up in people pickers and things like that. So we can simply move permissions away from an account in bulk. We could do it on an entire site and everything within that site, or an entire site collection, web application, or against the whole farm. There's no real in-depth auditing of permissions either, so again, that's something that we will be taking a look at, and also dead account reporting. So those users that have been disabled or removed from the Active Directory that do still have permissions in SharePoint, DeliverPoint is able to offer a dead account report so we can see who those users are and then go ahead and remove the permissions. So some good practices that really we want to try and maintain. We obviously want to have a good understanding of Share, something I really encourage you to go and take a look at. So when you click onto Share at a site level, or Share at a folder level, or even list level, it has different behaviors. If you share a site, you'll be adding that user that you shared the content with into the members group by default. If we click onto share on a folder or a document, it's going to break the permission inheritance on that folder or document and assign permissions directly to that user. So having a good understanding of that will allow you to maintain good permissions going forwards. Knowing where the permissions are inherited is very useful. Obviously, it's difficult to tell using SharePoint out of the box. And knowing who can actually access your content is quite important. So not just for farm administrators, but for end users as well. If they're creating some content, they want to know exactly who can see that content at any given time. So some of those things we've already discussed about decentralizing permissions management and being able to easily report on permissions. So let's take a look at how DeliverPoint can make some of these good practices come to life. So we'll flick across to our team site. Okay, so this is just an ordinary team site, and as you've already seen, when we go into the site settings and site permissions, what we typically see is the SharePoint groups. We can see what permissions the SharePoint groups have, and if we go into those SharePoint groups, we can see who's a member of them. Let's just contrast that with what DeliverPoint provides you. And this is in context in the site, just like the out-of-the-box permissions report is. So what we can do is simply click onto the same Site Actions button at the very top and choose Discover Site Permissions. So if we run that, we get a report in real time showing exactly who's got permissions to this site. So not just those 3 SharePoint groups and then trying to figure out who's a member of them. We literally see every single user that's got permissions to the team site. So we can sort these columns into ascending or descending order. We can just simply click onto the sorting there. By default, it's sorted by permission level. Okay, we can also sort by how the user is permissioned. But let's just take a look at some of them. We can see Zoe here. In fact, if we sort by username, we'll probably see that Zoe's got permissions more than once. Right down at the very bottom, we can see that she has edit permissions, and just above that, I can see she's got full control implicitly. And the reason why she has full control implicitly is because she's a site collection administrator. The edit permissions, I can work out how she's got permissions to that. Notice we've got the DP webinar members SharePoint group, and if we expand that, she's not a member of that group directly, but she's a member of it because of this sales domain group. So by being in that sales domain group, Zoe's ended up with edit permissions because that domain group is nested inside the SharePoint group. So for each of these accounts, here's another one where we've got duplicate permissions. Michael has been given edit twice, which isn't uncommon. And we can see why. He's in the developers domain group, and that developers domain group is inside the members group, and he's also a member of that members group directly also. And that quite often occurs because users can't see who's inside the Active Directory groups, and they want to make sure that their colleague can see the content, so they go and add them again. So from here we can do some tidying up. If I wanted to remove Michael from that SharePoint group directly, since he's already got it through the domain group, we can basically select that entry there, and from the menu at the top we can go ahead and delete those permissions. So it will delete whatever is selected. What we can also do is filter this report. So one of the things I might want to do is filter it by permission level. So if I need to know everybody who's got edit permissions, then we can do that. So that allows me to see all of those users in one place, something you can't do using SharePoint out of the box. And we can also find out how people were permissioned through domain groups. So if we have a look at a particular domain group, there's a sales domain group there, we can select that, and these users here all got their permissions because they're a member of sales. So filtering the report is extremely useful. You can also schedule that report as well. So if you want that report to be executed on a weekly or a monthly basis, you basically just specify where you want the report to be generated, and it will be stored inside a library ready for you to access it. We can also export it out to a spreadsheet as well if we want to, so that allows you to analyze it a little bit further inside Microsoft Excel. Now, that report was executed on the site. We can also run it inside lists and libraries. So inside the library here, we can click onto the DeliverPoint ribbon, and notice on the left-hand side we've got some list permission operations, and on the right-hand side we've got some item permission operations. So this is where we can report on more than one object. We've got a couple of folders here. Let's basically select those two folders, and we can discover the permissions on the two folders. And if we were to filter by a particular user, let's type a user in, we can see folder 1 and folder 2 and what permissions Zoe has to both of those folders, which happens to be the same on both of them. So we can select multiple objects and discover permissions. What we can also do is have a look at what's got broken permission inheritance, something that you can't easily tell. Again, you need to do those 4 clicks to tell whether the permissions are broken or not, using that yellow banner. So what we can do here is basically click onto the unique items report, and there we can see it's just Word document 2.docx, the item ID number 4 that has the unique permissions inside that document library. So we can go and have a look at the permissions on it, again using SharePoint out of the box, or we can basically just select that item, go up to the DeliverPoint ribbon, and discover the permissions from there. Okay, so that is focusing on DeliverPoint from an end user's perspective. What we're going to do now is go to the main DeliverPoint page, which is something that you could come into if you're just a site owner, maybe you're a site collection administrator, or maybe you have full control. Whatever, it's going to be security trimmed. So you will only see objects in here that you can actually manage the permissions on. Now I'm logged in as a system account deliberately just because I want to show you everything in here. So inside my server farm, I've got 2 web applications which are shown, and as we navigate into those web applications we can see the managed paths. We can expand the managed path and expand our site collections and keep on drilling down, and we get all the way down to our sub-site level. So one of the things that's very clear just by looking at the tree view is where permissions are inherited and where they are unique. So anything that has a full color icon has unique permissions. Anything that has a dimmed icon is inheriting permissions. So we don't have to waste our time looking at sites such as the Business Connectivity Services site here, because I know that it inherits permissions from the parent. And just simply by selecting it at the very bottom here, it will tell me where the permissions are actually managed. So what about those objects that do have unique permissions? Well, what we can do is go through and select them, and we could actually have a look at, well, what happens to be different between those and the parent site. So let's select all those sites with unique permissions. We'll select the parent site as well, then let's hit compare permissions. So we have the demo team site, which happens to be the top level site, and we can see already that the roll-up site is very, very similar to that. The permission site is very, very different, and we can see that Croatia and the DeliverPoint webinar sites are very, very similar. So armed with that information, what we could do is just basically decide, well, let's just set the roll-up team site to inherit permissions. So we can select that or multiple ones, and from the permissions inheritance button on the ribbon there, we can basically just set that to inherit. So that will then inherit its permissions. In a moment we'll see the icon change. We can also see from that icon, because there's a strike through in some of them, that there's lists or libraries within them that have unique permissions, or it could be a folder or a document. Now all of the lists and the libraries are also dimmed, so I know it's not them, but notice the document library in here has a strike through. So let's select that, and we can go through and view the folders of that document library, and sure enough I can see that folder 2 has broken permission inheritance since it's got the full color icon, and the folder 1 is dimmed. So from there we can We can understand our permission inheritance a lot better. We can also execute that same permissions report from here, so we can execute the Discover permissions report and bring that up for several team sites at the same time. We can also navigate to a different view, and this is an account-centric view, and the account-centric view allows me to focus in on a user. So if we just do a quick search on Brett, and this could be a domain group as well, so notice that if I put in a sales as an example, it picks up the domain group, and it's returning just one web application because that domain group is only granted permissions to things inside that one web application. Whereas if we search on Brett here, we can expand Brett's account, see 2 web applications, and we see more managed paths, more site collections. But what we can do from there is let's select the entire web application and click onto unique permissions. So this will show me literally everything Brett's been assigned permissions to inside that web application. First of all, we can see all of the groups that Brett's a member of. So we've got Brett's own account at the very top there. Of course, I'm in the domain users, but I'm also in the sales domain group and authenticated users. But I'm also in all of these other SharePoint groups as well. So we can see the scope of those SharePoint groups, what site collection they belong to, and also how I am a member of them. So whether it's directly or via a domain group. We've also got any sites or site collections that I administrate, and we can also see site permissions, we can see list permissions, and we can go right the way down to item permissions for that particular account. And if we see anything in there that we don't like the look of, as we scroll through it, I'm not seeing any direct permissions really assigned to Brett. Otherwise, it'd have Brett's account on the left-hand side. But what we can do is see that this sales domain group is giving Brett permissions to that particular site. We could click onto that permission itself and change it or remove it, whatever we want to do. So we can manage the permissions in there. Now, let's just check another user quite quickly. We'll do a search on Zoe. Maybe we're only interested in this at a site collection level. So rather than doing that on the entire web application, we'll just choose a site collection and look at the unique permissions. So with these permissions in mind, we might want to transfer those permissions to another user. Maybe Zoe's moving on and she's going to be replaced. So what we can do is basically hit transfer permissions. So we're transferring from Zoe and we're transferring to Bob. So we'll enter Bob in here and we'll execute that now and click on OK. So every 5 minutes, DeliverPoint checks for these jobs and we'll go ahead and execute them. So what we can see is that transfer permissions of Zoe to Bob is currently pending. It's going to take place on that entire site collection, so there will be a large number of permissions transferred between the 2 users. So we can keep an eye on that and come back and have a look at it in a moment. You will notice job 17 here was a similar operation. Executed at site collection level and transferring permissions between Phil and Zoe. If we hit the drop down and choose view job, we can actually see all of the objects that had their permissions transferred from Phil to Zoe in that particular case. So all of those you'd have to do manually if you didn't have DeliverPoint. So with that in mind, let's say we had a whoops moment and we accidentally transferred all of those permissions across. One of the things we can do there is roll back that operation. So all of these permissions will be transferred back again from Zoe to Phil in that particular case. So the whole thing will be undone there. Okay, so we'll keep an eye on that job and have a look at that in just a moment. So other things we can do, you saw a transfer permissions. Keep in mind that that's going to mean that one user is going to lose their permissions. They're going to be granted to somebody else. You do have a copy permissions, which can be useful if somebody else is joining a team. So you can take an existing account and copy permissions from it to another user, and that way they both have the same permissions. It's useful to use that in conjunction with a template account. So for example, for all of your salespeople, you could create an account called sales, give all the permissions that a salesperson needs from day one, and every time you hire a new salesperson, you can basically just copy the permissions from your template account to the new starter, and they'll get all the permissions that they need. Also, when you're granting permissions, we can click onto Grant Permissions, select multiple objects. We can give several different permissions. We can also add them to lots of different groups, and we can make that a temporary thing. So you can give it a duration of minutes, days, months, whatever you want to do, and after that time period has lapsed, those permissions will be revoked. And it will just be the permissions that you granted in this operation as well. So maybe somebody already has read, you want to grant them contribute, but after that time period, those permissions will be removed. And if you forgot about it, it doesn't matter. They'll be revoked anyway. So you've also got the delete permissions. So again, if somebody's just leaving the organization, you can go ahead and delete their permissions. That's different to revoke permissions, which you can do under here. Revoke permissions will take away a permission level. Delete permissions will delete whatever permissions they have from the scope that you selected. We also have dead account reporting. So we can run a dead account report on any given site collection. Notice that this didn't return any dead accounts. So we could just simply go and have a look at any in the web application. Let's look at some dead accounts there. And it will return the site collection for you. And sure enough, we can see that we do have some users that are considered dead accounts. So Daffy Duck in this particular case. So Daffy Duck wasn't found inside the Active Directory, but it was found to have permissions in SharePoint, and for that reason the account's showing up as a dead account. So that is going to be misleading to some users. You might be wondering why Daffy Duck has permissions to your content when Daffy Duck left a couple of years ago. So what we could do is basically simply select that account, come up to the report menu and delete the account. Again, that will be scheduled as a job. It'll execute in 5 minutes, and Daffy Duck will be removed, all of the permissions from that given site collection. So once more, that's a pending job. And we can see that that job that we did a moment ago, the transfer permissions from Zoe to Bob, has taken place. So we can drill down, have a quick look at that. And again, there's a lot of permissions that just got transferred between two accounts. So that's some of the operations that we can perform in DeliverPoint. Some other ones include the ability to clone entire sites. So if you have assigned all of the permissions that you need to a given site, let's say to a sales team site, but you want the same people to have the same permissions to a marketing site, and that is in perhaps a different site collection, what you could do there is click onto Copy Site Permissions, choose a site that you want to copy from, and we can choose the site that we want to copy to, and then the entire access control list will be copied across from one site to the next. So we basically select the source site, the target site. If we're going across site collections, we can clone the SharePoint groups. We can also clone any custom permission levels as well. And as we hit next and OK, that will go through and clone those permissions between those two sites. And we can do the same thing for lists and items as well. So a couple of things to finish up on. What I'm going to show you is the auditing of permissions. So at the moment, we've just seen how we can check what permissions people have currently. But if we select site collection as an example here, we can go through and audit the permissions. So that will show what permissions have changed within a given time period. So currently we're just looking at a 1 week time period, and we can see there's been all of these changes. So the actual member that was affected was on the right hand side. The plus or the minus with the green and red icons, that is showing whether the permissions were assigned or removed. We can see what the permission level was, where it was initiated, so what site was the change made via, and what was the scope. So if we made the change at a site level, the scope would be the site, but if we made it at a document library level, that could still inadvertently give somebody limited access to a site, and therefore the scope would have been the document library. We can see who initiated the change and the date that it was changed as well. And if we want to have a look at a larger window, we can basically go back and have a look at that larger window, and we can see lots more information in there. We can also see any permission inheritance changes. So this will show me any sites that have set to inherit permissions. So a short while ago, you actually saw me do that with DeliverPoint. We inherited the permissions on the roll-up team site using DeliverPoint. This doesn't just track changes that are made with DeliverPoint, it tracks changes that are made using SharePoint out the box, or also PowerShell as well. It's literally however the permissions were changed, it will track that information. And then we've also got some other objects here where their permissions were broken, or the permission inheritance was broken. The group membership changes are also tracked. So as we add new users to a group or take users away from a group, we get to see that information. So obviously there's a lot of information here about Zoe and Bob. So Zoe was losing a lot of privileges and Bob was gaining a lot of privileges through that group membership. And any deleted users as well will be flagged up at the bottom there. So that's the auditing. We can give that any time period, as I say, and you can start the auditing on any given site collection. So we basically get to select it, go to Auditing Settings, and from there we can start the auditing. So basically we go through and specify what we want to include, what do we want to audit in this particular case, and for how long do we want to audit it for. So we could have 365 days worth of information if we wanted to. All of that would get retained in our own database and permanently stored, so you can bring that information back at any time. So that's the auditing, but we also have the alerts that I mentioned. So using the alerts, we can take this particular site collection, we can hit the drop down and we can select Alert Me. So we don't have any alerts set up on this site collection yet, so we'll go through and create one. We can include any child scopes as well. So that is finding some child objects that have permissions alerts set up on them, and we can go through and create a new alert. So we want to give a title to this alert. So we'll set that as our title, so notify me of full control being granted. We can send the alerts to a specific account, so I can send those to myself and they will arrive in email format, and we can choose what we want to track exactly. So any permission change or just permission inheritance changes, group membership changes, or deleted users or groups. The change initiator pattern means that I don't need to track anything unless it's Bob that changed the permissions. We're making Bob a site collection admin, so I want to track what he's doing. So we could be alerted to any changes that he makes. We could also check for a certain permission level name pattern, so I can put full control in there. So it's only going to alert me should somebody be given full control. Or we can actually set a pattern, a user pattern on the member. So again, if we wanted to be notified that Edward Snowden was granted permissions somewhere inside this site collection, we can do that. Or if it's a certain organizational unit that we want to track, we can do that as well. So this is going to look for any permission changes as long as they are full control, and we can send that email notification immediately, or we can have a daily or weekly summary, and let's just hit create. So that's now tracking those changes. So as those permissions are granted, if we give somebody full control, it's going to go ahead and email Brett and let him know. Okay, so that's really a quick tour of the product, quick tour of what DeliverPoint provides you with. There are some settings to be aware of as well. So in the central administration pane, we can go through and navigate to the DeliverPoint configuration. And within there, we can do a number of different things. One of the most interesting things is to go to the permissions page. And within the permissions page, one of the downsides to SharePoint out of the box is that you need to give somebody full control if they're going to be managing permissions, or you're going to create a custom permission level that gives them the manage roles role, if you like. So if you want to overcome that, what you can do is maybe you've got a help desk, and that help desk, it would be useful if they could actually view the permission reports without having full control themselves to the content. That way, any user that decides that they need a higher level of permissions, or they're trying to troubleshoot why they can't see something, and they go to the help desk will be able to pull up a report, have a look at what permissions they've got, and notify them why they can't see the content. So we can set up auditors for that reason. So if I wanted to, let's say, make Zoe an account auditor, she can basically use DeliverPoint and run a permissions report on any object, even though she might not be able to actually go and access that object herself. She can see who's got permissions to it. We could also make users an operator. So if they're a DeliverPoint operator, we're giving them more than just the auditor permission. We're allowing them to perform any operations using DeliverPoint. So they can grant permissions, they can transfer, delete permissions, and so on, again, regardless of their own permission. So we're not maybe having to make people site collection administrators to just to manage permissions. We can give them the module operator permission level instead. So a couple of useful things in there. You'll also notice that there's things like the timer job settings. So there's several different timer jobs that crawl all of this information that make it available. So when we're executing a permission report on a single object, it's basically done in real time. But if we're doing things like running that unique permissions report that went across the entire web application or the entire farm, that information is being pulled from our own database, and that database is populated on a nightly basis with any permission changes that have occurred. So for that reason, we get to determine when the crawl takes place, whether it's incremental or a full crawl, and so on. Okay, so there's just some of the sort of refinements that you can make to DeliverPoint as well. So at that point, I'm going to, we've got a few minutes left if there's any questions. So let's just navigate through the slides. Just one area to mention where to obtain DeliverPoint. Just to point out, it is available for SharePoint on-premises and also SharePoint Online as well as an add-in. So on the lightningtools.com website, from the products menu, you can go across to permissions management and download a trial of DeliverPoint, and you can also find it as well for, like I say, for Office 365 on our site. But at that point, I'll open up for any questions. So if you do have a question, you can raise your hand using the GoToMeeting software. I can unmute you and you can ask your question. Or alternatively, if you like, you can email us on brett@lightningtools.com, or my personal Twitter handle, which is @BrettLonsdale. Looks like we have a couple of questions. First one from David Dunn. So David, I'm going to unmute you.
Great. I actually have a few.
Okay.
So how does it monitor the AD permissions? Does it need access to the Active Directory tree?
Okay, so yeah, first question, how do we monitor the AD permissions? So the only thing we're doing with the Active Directory is crawling it, we're reading it. And the DeliverPoint service account just needs to be an Active Directory account, and that is enough to give it read permissions to the Active Directory. So it will use that to crawl it, and the members that it finds will be populated into our own DeliverPoint database, just as far as their name is concerned, and so on.
Okay, so it would be the same permissions as any other domain user can read the tree.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there an export feature here to export a Excel or CSV or anything like that?
Absolutely, yep. So the question there is there an export feature for the reports? So every single report you can export to Excel. So yeah, when you run the Discover Permissions reports, you'll find the export to spreadsheet, unique permission reports, dedicate reports. They can all be exported.
Okay, can we see that, or do you have some copy you can send me later?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's just try. I'm actually logged into the server, and that sometimes gives undesired results when you're running Office on the server with SharePoint. So we'll just give it a shot, but if it fails, then I'll send you one later on. but it looks like that's producing the report for me. Okay, so yeah, that should be open in just a second. Did you have another question whilst we were waiting? Yeah.
So it does not seem to be showing the limited access permissions. Is that by design?
The limited access are shown. There just weren't any on the sites that I was executing. But yeah, limited access permissions are displayed. In fact, if I go to the DeliverPoint page, we could probably bring some up.
Okay, so which is fine. My real question is, can you filter that out? Because we see that all over the place, and it's just clutter.
Okay, yes, so you can, yeah. So any of the permission levels you can filter out, yeah. But yeah, you can see this particular site here has quite a few users that have limited access.
Okay. And one question on the database, and then I'll stop. The database is sitting on the SQL server that is the SharePoint SQL server, or it can sit on that?
Yeah, it can sit on that. It can actually be any SQL server. So yeah, you've got the database settings. You can specify where that is going to go. And yeah, that's one of the things that you're asked during the installation is where that's going to be housed.
Okay, I'll let somebody else.
Okay, thank you for your questions, David. Okay, I think next one was Bert Floriday, so I'm going to unmute you, Bert.
So I'll just ask these quickly, and then you can answer them. So the first is, I might have missed this, but did it show anything for permissions granted through web application policy, or can you see that? Secondly, does it show you any indication of security scope count for a list, right? So that's important to know sometimes, the number of security scopes. And then finally, does it show you anything for delegated permissions in central admin, like for user profile application or the search service or managed metadata? That's it. Thank you.
Okay, all right, great. So thanks for your question. So yeah, so I think the first one, if we go through and look at the Discover permissions report. I'm sorry, actually, Bert, could you just remind me of your first question? It went out of my mind.
Through the web application policies.
Oh, so, yeah, that was right. Okay, so thank you. So yeah, we've got the implicit users, as we call them. That's something that can be turned on or turned off. So anybody showing as an implicit user means that they're not actually granted permissions in the ACL against that particular site, but they do have permissions. So these users that we can see at the top have all gained their permissions through being site collection admins. Anybody that has a user policy against the web application would show as an implicit user, and again, that can be something you switch on or switch off if you don't want your users to be able to see that information. So it won't include any service accounts. So service accounts won't show in there. So like you say, the managed metadata service accounts and things like that. And then your last question
was about the security scope count. So for a list, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay. So yeah, it's not so much a count, but what we do is from the DeliverPoint ribbon, we can click onto the unique items, and that will show every single object that has broken permission inheritance within inside that list or library.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's not just giving you it's not a count so much as showing you where they are.
Okay.
All right. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
And Bill. We have Bill Saby.
Brett, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yeah. Hi, Bill.
Good. Hi. Curious for the dead user report. If a user is an owner of a SharePoint security group, or they have access control, like they're the contact for access control for a site, do we get a chance to review that before we delete them?
Absolutely. Yeah. So before you delete a dead account, what I would recommend that you do is perform the unique permissions report on that user. So so that even though Daffy Duck in my case was the dead account, we can still go ahead and see. So we can still have a look at where those permissions lie for Daffy Duck. So I can go through and have a look at the unique permission report, and it will tell me any site collection administrator designations or anything like that. As far as the group owner membership goes, this report doesn't give you that information, but I'll show you how we handle that in a moment. And there's also, just to add on to your question, is what happens if that user is a site collection administrator in their own right, or a site owner, or something to that effect. So what we do in that case is, from the inside the DeliverPoint configuration under permissions, you can set up a replacement user account. So in that instance, the replacement user account will replace the dead account that we're removing. So you're never going to orphan an object, if you like. So it's kind of a safety net. You could have maybe your farm admin account or something like that become the replacement user should that account be deleted and they were a site collection admin or something.
And what about if they're the access control contact? Is there a way to report on those?
No, good question. I don't believe there is. So yeah, I'll make a note of that. It'd be quite a nice addition to it.
So just going back on the security group owner, how did you say I could discover that?
So it's not going to show you if they are a group owner, but it would replace the group owner with the replacement user account. Should you go and remove that account completely?
So, but if I really want to get down to finding out what groups they're a member of, I guess, because I do want to fix that. Like I may not have really wanted individual users to be owners of a security group. I'd rather assign that to one of my group objects. So I really think that would be a good cleanup capability if I could discover the owners of security groups.
Yep, I absolutely agree. I think that would be a great feature. So yeah, I guess watch this space. So we'll try and include that in the product.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Thanks, Bill. Okay, I think we have one more question that I can see, which is from Melanie Betchell. So Melanie, I'm going to unmute you. Hi, Melanie.
Hello. Can you hear me?
I can indeed, yeah. Okay.
I have two questions. One is about the rollback functionality. For how long do you retain the option to roll back?
Okay, so great question. So the rollback is basically as long as that information is stored inside our SQL database, the DeliverPoint database. So as long as you're not archiving any of the information or anything like that from that database, that's as far as you could roll back to.
Okay. Is there any logging related to that other than the job history or the job status?
Yeah, there's we do write to we have our own log file that we write to, but there's also a lot of tables in the database itself which are logging tables. So, so yeah, you can report on the database and see exactly what occurred using that.
So you say you have a log file in addition to the database table, or just the database?
There's the database and a log file, yeah. Yeah.
Could you please just let me know where I can find this log file, because I never noticed that.
Okay, yeah. Do you mind if I dig that out? And I'm probably going to be fumbling finding it myself, so I'll notify you offline.
That would be great. Yeah, that would be very nice.
Okay.
And my last question on the dashboard, the permission inheritance that you display, does it only go down to the folders, so you don't indicate unique other items like folders, documents, and files?
Correct. So within the tree view, mainly this is a performance consideration. Yeah, we go down to, and that's something that you can turn on or turn off as well, going down to the folder level. But yeah, within a list or a library, we view the folders, not the items in here. That said, you can navigate to that document library. So we can navigate to it and then run that unique permissions report on the library itself, and that will show you the permission inheritance there. There is also something I didn't point out, a column that you can add, which again is only available for users with full control. So I could go and create a column within inside a list or library, which is the DeliverPoint inheritance field type. So if I just name that inherits and click on OK, and we'll navigate back to the document library, you'll see that we actually get an icon against each item, and we can see from that whether the documents have got broken permission inheritance or not as well.
Okay, and related to that, in the dashboard, the icon, inheriting icon, does it also show you if you never have a non-inheriting, not a folder that has broken permission inheritance, but only documents, for example, with unique permissions? Will you also see the icon in the dashboard?
Yeah, if it's a document with broken permission inheritance, you would also see the icon. Yeah. So
so even if you don't have a folder that has unique permissions.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
It would show if that container, whatever it is, a list or a library or a site, contains anything with broken permission inheritance, you'll see the strike through. Yeah.
Okay. Good.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Thank you, Melanie. Okay, I think David might have another question. Let me just unmute you, David.
Yeah, so, I was reading through the documentation. It says this installs as a solution file, correct?
Yes, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
All right, so is that installed on all site collections, or is there anything you need to do in particular to enable it on a site collection?
Okay, it's actually a web application scoped solution. Okay. So, or feature, I should say. So, yeah, it's enabled at web application level.
Okay. So I saw that you had to edit like the element XML or something like that to limit it to site collection owners. So there's no like feature that you could turn on or off per site. Like, let's say I trust these users to actually be able to manage their site. I would not want to let these people have anything to do with the permissions. So can I toggle that on or off on a, like a site collection or a sub-site basis? You
can make it available to just site collection administrators, which is actually a setting in the central admin. So you can set that there. It's like I've lost my my central admin pane, but I'll bring that back up. So let me just show you that setting. So here under the DeliverPoint configuration, it's under the tree view settings. Here we can restrict it to just site collection administrators. However, the way that it works is it's completely invisible to users that wouldn't have access to permissions anyway in SharePoint. So that's not necessarily just full control users. It's anybody that has the enumerate permissions role. So if a user can see site settings, site permissions, then they will be able to see DeliverPoint. If they can't get to this page in SharePoint, then they're not going to be able to see DeliverPoint, if that makes sense. So it's completely security trimmed for that reason.
Yeah. But I cannot turn it off and on based on like an individual site collection or SP web level.
That you can do that with, like you said, in the elements file. So if you wanted to, okay. Yeah, it's basically removing the actions. Yeah, you could make it invisible to those users.
All right, thanks.
Okay. No problem. Thank you. Okay, I don't see any more questions, so I want to thank everybody for their questions, and thank you for the attendance. The webinar was recorded, so I'll post that up and you can gain access to it. So I'll email you all where to find that. But yeah, thank you very much for your time. Again, if you think of any questions, please email me on brett@lightningtools.com, or so you can post your questions on Twitter and so on as well. Okay, thank you very much.